In the town where I used to live, there lived a tailor. This man was a wonderful tailor, always making coats and suits and dresses and skirts and shirts and pants for the folks in my town. And because he was so good, he always had plenty of work to do. In fact, he worked all day long and often well into the night. Besides being very tired, he was also quite ragged because he spent most of his time doing nice things for others. He just didn't have time to make nice things for himself, nor did he have the time to mend his old clothes. One day the mayor of our town said to the tailor, "We love your work, but even more than loving your work, we love you. And because we do, we realize and recognize it's time for you to take a break, time for you to rest. And once you have rested, take this green velvet material and you go ahead and you make something for yourself, something nice." And the tailor thought it was a good idea, and that's just what he did. He rested for about 6 to 8 weeks, and after he had rested, he took the green velvet and made for himself the baddest green velvet jacket that anybody had ever seen. And when he put it on, he checked out the sleeves, and they were just right, and it buttoned perfectly. And he said, "I gotta go out and show this off to everybody." And he did. He rushed right out onto the main street, and as he strolled along, those who saw him said, "Looking good, looking good, looking good." So he wore that jacket. In fact, he wore it, and he wore it until he wore it out. Now, once it was all worn out, he took it right back to the workshop and placed it right there in the center of his old beat-up work table. He looked at it for a while, and he realized there was still some good fabric left. So he took the jacket apart, and from the good parts, created a green velvet vest that was even better than the jacket. And when he put that on, he said, "Everybody's got to see this." And he rushed right out onto Main Street, and as he strolled along, he turned from side to side, and when the people saw him, everybody who saw him looked at him and said, "Looking good, looking good, looking good." And so he wore that vest. In fact, he wore it until he wore it out. Now, once it was all worn out, he took it right back to the workshop and placed it right there in the center of the work table and looked at it for a while. He turned it this way and he turned it that way, and he even held it up to the light and realized there was still some good fabric left. So he cut the old vest apart, and from the good pieces, he created a green velvet necktie. And when he put it on, and he tied it with the perfect knot, and when he checked out the perfect knot and the marvelous tie, and when the people saw it, why, they looked at him and nearly shouted, "Looking good, looking good, looking good." And so he wore that necktie. In fact, he wore it, and he wore it until he wore it out. Now, once it was all worn out, he took it right back to the workshop, placed it right there in the center of the workbench, and thought about it for a couple of days. And on the third day, cut one end of it off, the only good part. And from that one small good piece, he made one green velvet covered button. And he placed it right there on his lapel. And when he walked out this time, he kind of stuck out his chest so that when the sun would hit the button would gleam, and the people would scream, "Looking good, looking good, looking good." And so he wore that button. In fact, he wore it, and he wore it until he wore it out. Now, once he wore it out, he took it right back to the workshop, placed it right there in the center of the work table, and this time he didn't look at it for very long and hard, because there wasn't that much to look at. But he looked nevertheless and said, "I can make something out of this button." And he did. And you know what he made? Well, what he made was this story. And he told it to me, and I just told it to you.